This is Miss Diorama. In this video, I'll show you how I made this 1:24 scale building facade, which I coloured using some paint pens that Arrtx kindly sent to me. First, let's talk about these pens. These pens provide strong coverage, the paint is water-based and waterproof once dry, and apparently they can paint on anything, which is quite a bold claim. I think what they really mean is that they will pretty much work on any surface that you'd normally be able to paint with regular acrylic paints. These pens have a 3mm tip, and paint is dispensed by pressing on the tip a few times. Anyway, this pack comes with a whole 48 bright colours to choose from. So I'm going to put them to the test by using them on a variety of surfaces including XPS Foam, wood, matboard and cardstock. Moving on to the project, I first cut some pieces of XPS Foam using the Proxon tabletop hot wire cutter. I first cut a wall piece which is about 130mm in height by 200 by 15. Then I cut a piece for the footpath which is about the same length as the wall and about 70mm wide and 8mm in thickness. It was now time to add textures to the surfaces of the foam. There are a few ways to do this. One way is to add textures by hand. Using a stencil as a guide, I draw in a window and a sill, a door and some headers above the door and the window. This is where some steps will eventually be. I'm going to show you how to apply textures by hand on a separate piece of foam. Once the features are outlined, I cut out the window and the door using a hobby knife. Any rough edges are filed smooth. Although you can draw stones by hand, I'm using a roller to apply a stone wall texture. This is the result from using the texture roller. Wood texture can be applied using the tip of a sharpened pencil. There is another way to do this, and that's to use a laser. I'm not going to bore you with that whole process because I have so much more to get through in this video. But this is the result using a laser. I'm using a hobby knife to cut out the window and door because if I'd used a laser to do this, the laser might have melted too much away from around the edges in its attempt to burn all the way through the foam. Any rough edges are filed smooth. I am using some tweezers to extend the stone texture into the door and window recesses. And here's the result. Doing this gives the stone edges a more defined look. I repeat the process for the outer edges. Any rough edges are filed smooth. Although I am demonstrating Arrtx Paint Pens, I felt the pieces needed to be undercoated first to allow the full potential of these pens to emerge. set the pieces aside to dry and then moved on to making a 1:24 scale bicycle. These were some of the parts needed to make the bicycle. I designed this bicycle and cut the parts using a laser cutter. Before I could glue any more of the parts together, they need to be coloured first. That's because once they are glued together, it would be too difficult to colour them with these pens. Even if I was using paint and a brush, I would still be painting most of these parts before fully assembling the bicycle. One thing I really like about these pens is that the drying time seems to be a lot quicker than it would be for paint. Not only that, if you've ever attempted to paint matte bottom plywood, you would know that you can't have the paint too wet, otherwise it can tend to both delaminate and warp the material. These pens seem to reduce the chance of that happening. With all those parts now coloured, I can now glue some of them together. This piece is the front fender. And this piece is the rear fender. These parts will make up the chain guard and the chainstay. The rear wheel is attached along with this assembly. I am using cocktail sticks for the axles. The axle is trimmed down to size. The front wheel is attached to the front fender using another cocktail stick as an axle. The front axle is trimmed down to size. The chain wheel is attached. This is followed by the main bike frame. It was at this time that I decided to add colour to more parts of the frame. This is where one limitation with these pens becomes apparent. The 3mm tips are too big for some tiny details. I was previously sent these Arrtx paint pens that have brush tips, which do allow you to paint harder to reach areas. If you have to colour a lot of fine details, these pens with the rounded tips are probably best used in combination with other art mediums, such as these pens with brush tips. With that sorted, I coloured the pannier rack with the silver pen and attached it to the rear of the bike. The main frame can now be glued in place. These 4 rings will make up a tube that will carry the handlebars and allow them to actually turn. With that done, it was time to make a basket for the front of the bicycle. The basket will be made using cardstock. I decided to colour the parts before assembling the basket. Once all the parts were dry, I assembled the basket using tacky glue. To give the basket a more realistic appearance, this weave texture is glued onto the outside of the basket. I set the basket aside to dry and moved on to making a seat for the bicycle. With that done, it was time to make the pedal assemblies. Colour was added to the parts before they were put together. Glue was applied to the outside of the crank arm so that the pedal will still be able to move freely. The handlebar tube was also coloured before attaching it to the front fender. This part was added to support the bike frame. The basket will eventually be attached to this part. Before anything else, it was time to attach the front wheel assembly to the main bike frame. These parts will make up a kickstand for the bike. it was onto the handlebars. This assembly will sit inside the front tube and it will also carry the handlebars. The handlebars are glued in place at a slight angle using tacky glue. Now the basket can finally be attached. This is followed by the bike seat. The axles are fixed in place with some well-placed glue, but the wheels can still spin. Finally, the pedals are attached to the bicycle. As you can see, the pedals can both actually spin, and independently of one another. The kickstand is attached, and that almost completes this tiny 1:24 scale bicycle. There is one more detail to add, but I'll come back to that later. It was time to add colour to the stone wall. I coloured the entire wall using the grey pen. Once the grey was fully dry, I added a few acrylic washes over the stonework. Here is the footpath already painted. I kept adding colour washes to both pieces until I was happy with the result. Once the colour washes had dried fully, I added colour to the wooden beams so they would stand out. I added some colours to individual pavers to create variation in the footpath. I added yet another acrylic wash over the footpath. After that, I decided to add some colours to individual stones to create more variation in the stone wall as well. And of course, this was followed by another acrylic wash to unify all the colours. Then I added colour to all the parts that would make up the shutters and the door. I wasn't actually happy with the first colour, so I changed it to this pink. Once the colour was dry, I assembled the shutters and carefully pushed the blades open with some tweezers. The door was also partially assembled. The shutters and the door were glued into place in the wall piece. This was followed by some front steps. With that done, it was time to assemble a diorama frame. The footpath and wall were then glued in place against the frame. This was followed by the sides and by the top and front pieces of the frame. The shutters and the door were given a dark wash. The diorama frame was also painted with the same dark wash. The diorama was set aside while I moved on to making some plant pots. I made 3 pots in total, and these were made by gluing together a range of circles cut from 1.5mm thick balsa wood. Once the glue was dry, the surfaces were filed until a smooth exterior was achieved. Once all 3 pots were completed, I moved on to making some leaves and flowers. To achieve this, I first coloured some regular copy paper on both sides with a range of different colours. Once the colours were dry, I lasered a variety of leaves and flowers from the coloured samples. This sunflower is an example of one of the flowers that I made. This chrysanthemum is another example. And this rose. As well as this pink chrysanthemum. I'll be showing you how I made each one of these shortly. But first, I'm going to construct a rose bush complete with some tiny leaves. Using a ball stylus, the leaves are given a curved shape. The leaves are then glued onto the bush one by one. Every one of the flower petals are curved with a ball stylus. Then, to make a rose, I proceed to glue 3 flower parts together. The glue is allowed to dry and then the rose can be glued onto the bush. This process is repeated until there are enough roses to make this little rose bush look complete. To make the sunflowers, I first placed a dot of brown in the centre of half of all the flowers. Then I used the ball stylus to curve the petals on each one of the flowers. I took one of the plain flowers, turned it over, placed a dot of glue in the middle, and placed one of the flowers with the brown centre on top. Then a wire stem was glued onto the underside of the flower. To make the chrysanthemums, I layered 3 of the curved flower parts together and then glued a wire stem to the underside of each flower. To make some peach peonies, I used the same method as I used to make the other flowers. First, curving the petals, then gluing multiple flowers together. To make the centre of the flowers, I folded a 4-petal flower over, then over again. And glued one of these into the centre of each of the flowers. Finally, a stem was added to each flower. When I had all the flowers I needed, I moved on to making an ivy vine. To make the ivy vine, I joined some stems with florist wire until I was happy with the shape of the vine. I coloured the stem brown. the colour was drying, I thought I would also add some colour to all of the pots. I was wanting this pot to look as if it were made of terracotta. I wasn't happy with the first colour I used, so I used another colour, which I was happy with. I proceeded to colour the other pots with some more colours. I made a shrub using some Woodland Scenics dark green lichen, which I glued to some more root stems. I placed this into one of the pots and proceeded to glue the peach peonies that I made earlier to the shrub. Then it was back to the ivy vine. Before adding more leaves to the vine, I thought I should attach it to the wall first, before adding the rest of the leaves. With the end now inside, it was time to start adding the rest of the pieces to the diorama. There was one more thing to do, and that was to add some flowers to the bicycle basket. And with that, the diorama was complete. I hope you enjoyed watching this video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to my channel. Thanks for watching. Bye for now, see you next time.